Our top focus on WION World is one. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will travel to Washington, D.C. this week to meet President Joe Biden. Zelensky will plead his case before Republicans who are opposed to sending more money for Ukraine's fight against Russia amid warnings that the aid will run out in few weeks. In a statement, the White House said that the two leaders will discuss the urgent need facing Ukraine. The meeting comes as the White House looks to strike an agreement with the Congress that would provide military aid for Ukraine and Israel. Well, Zelensky's office said that the Ukrainian leader would arrive in Washington, D.C. on Monday and meet Biden during a working visit that would include a series of meetings and discussions between the two leaders. Reports suggest that the Ukrainian president has also been invited to address U.S. senators on Tuesday in the Capitol. A private meeting between Zelensky and the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson will also be held in the Capitol on the same very day. Now, key topics during his visit would include defense cooperation between U.S. and Ukraine, particularly through joint projects on production of weapons and air defense systems. Earlier on Sunday, Zelensky arrived in Argentina and met the presidents of Ecuador and Paraguay at the inauguration of new Argentine President Javier Milei. Now, during his first trip to Latin America, Zelensky focused on Ukraine's bid to secure the support of countries in the global south in Ukraine's 21-month-old war against Russia. Ukraine's presidential chief of staff stated that the delegation from Kiev had discussed Ukraine's peace formula with the leaders of Ecuador and Paraguay. Zelensky hopes to convene a global peace summit next year. He has promoted a peace plan that includes full withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine and the recognition of its post-Soviet 1991 borders. Zelensky said that he held a very frank conversation with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban on the sidelines of the inauguration of Argentine President Javier Milei. The meeting took place against a backdrop of Orban's threatening that he says that he would block more EU financial support to Kiev and his opposition of Ukraine's entry to the bloc. Wait. And for more on Zelensky's upcoming visit to Washington, D.C., we are being joined by William Courtney from Washington, D.C. He's an adjunct senior fellow at RAND Global think tank. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Mr. Courtney.
You're welcome.
Mr. Courtney, just a few days ago, we saw that the Senate blocked Ukraine and Israel aid as they demand border policy changes. And now we see the Ukrainian president visiting Washington, D.C. Will he be able to garner support for Ukraine's urgent needs?
President Zelensky is likely to be persuasive with a number of members of the Senate and the House of Representatives. However, it is clear that the Biden administration will have to make more concessions on border security in order to obtain Republican support for the financial assistance. And President Biden has said he is willing to make more concessions. There appear to be intensive negotiations taking place over the weekend on these issues. And so there may be a vote next week if those negotiations are successful. The vote last week by the Senate was primarily about the border security issue, not Ukraine aid.
Right. Mr. Courtney, the U.S. President just last Wednesday signaled that a renewed openness to striking a deal that includes provisions to address the border issue, saying that he's willing to make significant compromises on border policy in order to unlock funding for Ukraine. Do you think that will unlock the divide that we're seeing in Congress for Ukraine aid?
If President Biden makes enough concessions, yes, that's quite possible, maybe even probable. The key issue in these concessions is that typically broad policy issues are not addressed in appropriations bills, but the Republicans are demanding some really broad changes that would increase the likelihood that illegal immigrants would be returned away from the United States rather than be admitted into the United States and allowed to live here and work here until an asylum hearing can be held. But the border crisis on the southern border with the U.S. is really quite serious. I mean, some days recently there have been as many as 10 or 12,000 illegal immigrants coming across the border. That's not a sustainable amount. In the election in November, next November, the border crisis issue is likely to be one of the major issues in the election.
Yes.
And so Democrats have an incentive to be able to say that they're taking tough measures.
Mr. Courtney, as Ukraine's war funding dries up, do you think that Ukrainian President Zelensky is concerned that the conflict in Gaza is affecting the aid for Ukraine at the moment?
He might be somewhat concerned about that, but the aid bill provides assistance for Ukraine, for Israel, and for humanitarian relief in Gaza. So I think the Gaza issue is not the most important factor in holding up the aid bill. It's really border security. Recent polls show about half of Republicans are skeptical about providing more aid to Ukraine, but another half are supportive, and most Democrats are supportive. So if there's actually a vote on assistance, it's likely to pass by over a 2-to-1 margin.
Mr. Courtney, your viewpoints if the Western support for Ukraine is fraying just as Kiev's counteroffensive falters and Putin's forces push for new gains?
Yes, so the issue of stasis, a stalemate on the ground has been something that's probably had some effect on people in Congress in terms of their willingness to support more assistance. But Ukraine has also been making progress on Crimea. A year ago, a lot of experts thought that Crimea would be the toughest issue Ukraine faced. But Ukraine has been creatively using unmanned maritime drones, aerial drones, anti-ship missiles, and forced Russia to move many or most of its warships out of Crimea and further to the east. Ukraine's strategy is, at this point, to deny Russia the opportunity to project force in the region from Crimea. And that strategy is fairly successful.
Right, Mr. Courtney, thanks very much for joining us and beyond, sharing insights with us on the story.
You're quite welcome.